My name is Claire Donovan. I am 37 years old. 19 years ago, my parents stood in the doorway of our family home and told me to leave. I was 18, 3 months pregnant, holding a duffel bag I had packed in under 20 minutes while my mother watched with her arms crossed and my father stared at the wall. It was February in Cincinnati, Ohio. Sleet was hitting the driveway in sheets. I had $140 in my checking account and nowhere to go. That night, my father had his attorney prepare documents that officially removed me from the family. Not just from the will. From everything. From them. From the name. From any future they were planning. I kept those documents. I have kept every single one for 19 years. I kept them in a fireproof box in the back of my closet the way other people keep birth certificates and passports. Because to me, those papers were a record. A record of who they really were underneath all the church attendance and country club memberships and neighborhood association leadership and front porch smiles. For nearly 2 decades I was a rumor to the people in their world. They told everyone I had gone to study abroad, that I was living in Europe somewhere, that I had built a wonderful life overseas and simply preferred to stay. They said it so many times and with such practiced ease that I think they eventually believed it themselves. They built their spotless reputation on top of the daughter they discarded. And then last month, after 19 years of complete silence, they showed up at my front door in matching wool coats, smiling like we had simply lost touch, asking to meet their grandson. A grandson they had been bragging about to hundreds of their most influential friends. A grandson who did not exist. And what they found instead dismantled everything they had spent decades constructing. Let me take you back to the beginning. Back to where this story really starts. Columbus, Ohio, February 2005. I was 18 years old, a senior at Westfield Preparatory Academy, and the youngest child of Gerald and Patricia Donovan. On paper we were the kind of family that other families looked at and sighed. My father was a senior partner at a corporate litigation firm, Donovan & Briggs, established in 1991. My mother chaired the annual fundraising gala for the city's most prestigious children's hospital and had done so for 6 consecutive years. We had a home with white columns on the front porch. We attended St. Michael's Episcopal Church every Sunday without exception. We were presented, polished, and perfectly curated in every possible way. But inside that house there was a hierarchy, and I understood mine from a very young age. My brother Derek was 25 and finishing his final year at Georgetown Law School. He was the heir to everything my father had built, the son who would carry the family name into another generation of professional achievement. My sister Vivian was 22 and engaged to a young man whose family owned 3 manufacturing plants in the Midwest. She was the beautiful, compliant daughter who had learned early that agreement was a form of currency in our home. And then there was me. My mother once referred to my birth as her unexpected 3rd chapter. She said it warmly, publicly, the way she said everything that was meant for an audience. But privately I always understood that unexpected was not a compliment. It was a category. The signs were quiet but they were constant. When my school portraits arrived each fall they somehow never made it onto the living room wall where Derek and Vivian smiled from matching frames. Dinner conversations circled around Derek's mock trial victories or Vivian's wedding venue negotiations. When I told my parents I had been accepted into the honors writing program at school my father said, "That is nice, Claire," and returned immediately to asking Derek about his internship. I learned to take up less space. To need less. To want less out loud. My father had a phrase he repeated at every gathering where someone asked how things were going. He would say, "Reputation is a cathedral. It takes a lifetime to build and one match to burn." I heard those words hundreds of times growing up. I had no idea how directly they would apply to me one day. Or that I would be the one holding the match. I met Jonah Pierce at a volunteer program downtown. Not at a party, not at school. At a food pantry where I had started spending Saturday mornings because being outside my house felt like breathing. Jonah was 20, worked at his cousin's auto detailing shop on weekdays and volunteered on weekends because, as he told me the first time we spoke, it makes the week feel like it meant something. He had come from a working-class family in a part of the city my parents had never once visited. He was kind in a way that did not perform. He was attentive in a way that did not calculate. He asked me questions and then listened to the answers, actually listened, which was something I had not experienced at home in a very long time. We were together for 4 months before I found out. I remember sitting in the bathroom of a gas station on Maple Avenue, hands trembling, staring at a pregnancy test I had bought with cash because I was too afraid to use my debit card. 2 lines. I sat on that floor for a long time. I did not cry right away. I just sat there running through every possible outcome in my head and understanding, with a clarity that felt like ice water, exactly how my parents were going to respond. When I told Jonah, he did not leave. He sat across from me at a diner booth with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup and he said, "Whatever you decide, I am with you. I am not going anywhere." I wanted to believe him. Most of me did. But I had grown up watching my parents respond to anything inconvenient by making it disappear, and I knew that a pregnant teenage daughter did not fit anywhere in their cathedral. I chose to tell them on a Sunday evening after dinner. I do not know why I thought that was the right moment. Maybe I thought the familiar setting would soften something. The table still had dishes on it when I said the words. "I am pregnant." My mother set down her wine glass with a precision that was somehow louder than dropping it. My father looked at me for a long moment without speaking. He asked who the father was. He asked if it was someone from Westfield. I told him about Jonah. I told him Jonah worked at an auto shop and had grown up on the east side of the city. My mother went very still the way she did when she was managing her public face in private. My father stood up from the table. He did not raise his voice. Gerald Donovan never raised his voice. He said, "You will not continue this pregnancy under this roof." He said, "If you make that choice, you will no longer be a member of this family." He said it the way he would tell a client the terms of a settlement. Flat, final, non-negotiable. By 9 in the evening I was standing in the sleet on our driveway with a duffel bag at my feet. My mother had opened the front door and pointed outside. Not my father. My mother. Derek and Vivian watched from the upstairs hallway. Neither of them came down. I called Jonah from my cell phone with shaking hands. He picked up on the second ring. He showed up in 25 minutes in his cousin's truck, jumped out before it had fully stopped, and wrapped me in his jacket without saying a word. We drove to his cousin's apartment that night. I slept on a pull-out sofa under a blanket that smelled like motor oil and I thought, this is what starting over feels like. 3 days later, my father had his attorney mail me a certified letter. Signature required. It stated that Claire Marie Donovan hereby forfeited all rights to the Donovan family estate and that the Donovan family bore no legal or moral obligation to the aforementioned or any dependent thereof. I remember standing at the mailbox in the sleet reading those words. Any dependent thereof. That phrase would stay with me for 19 years. That was how they referred to the child I was carrying. A dependent thereof, not a grandchild, not a person, a legal variable to be excluded. I kept that letter. I have kept it every day since. Jonah and I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Dayton 2 months later. $515 a month above a dry cleaning shop that smelled like chemicals and steam. I finished my high school diploma through an online program while working part-time at a coffee shop where the manager let me keep my hours flexible as my pregnancy progressed. Jonah worked double shifts most weeks. We had a card table we used as a dining table, a second-hand sofa, and a lamp we found on the side of the road that worked perfectly fine once we replaced the bulb. We were not comfortable, but we were together, and for the first time in my life I felt like someone was genuinely glad I existed. Nora Jean Pierce was born on October 3, 2005, at Miami Valley Hospital, 7 pounds 1 ounce. Her father's dark eyes, my stubborn jaw. She came out furious, screaming at the fluorescent lights, and I remember thinking, good. Stay loud. Never let anyone make you quiet. The early years were a blur of survival so complete it had its own texture. Jonah worked, I studied, we traded off on everything. I enrolled in the communications program at Sinclair Community College, 2 classes a semester, whatever fit around Nora's schedule and our budget. I sent my parents a birth announcement when Nora was born. No response. I sent a photo on her first birthday. Nothing. By her second birthday I stopped sending anything at all. I understood the silence was not an oversight. It was a policy. Jonah and I talked about getting married in that half-formed way that people do when they are too tired and too broke to plan anything but the idea feels warm enough to hold on to. We said we would do it properly when things settled. Things did not settle. On April 9, 2010, Jonah was driving home from a late shift when a driver ran a red light on Interstate 75. Jonah died at the scene. He was 25 years old. Nora was 4. I was 23. I had a 4-year-old daughter, a part-time job, 2 semesters of community college credits, and $9,000 in life insurance. That was everything. I sat in the parking lot of the hospital where they had taken him and I called no one because there was no one to call. My parents had erased me. Jonah's family was grieving their own loss. I sat there for a very long time. And then I drove home to Nora. I could have dissolved into that grief. I understood it as an option. I chose not to, not because I was strong in any mythic sense, but because Nora needed breakfast in the morning and someone to read to her at night and a mother who was present. So I kept going the way you keep going when the only alternative is stopping. Before Jonah died, I had started taking on small decorating projects for neighbors and friends. Helping people restyle their apartments, staging homes for a realtor who lived down the street and had noticed how I had transformed our tiny apartment with almost no money. People told me I had a gift for making spaces feel intentional. After Jonah died, I leaned into that work completely. It was something I could do on my own hours, something that paid better than the coffee shop, something that felt like mine. In 2013, I met a woman named Sandra Okafor at a business development workshop at the community college. She was 55, had spent 3 decades as a creative director for a major architecture firm in Chicago, and had relocated to Columbus to be closer to her grandchildren. She sat next to me during a session on client communication and afterward asked to see photos of my work on my phone. She looked through them for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "You have a real point of view. That is rarer than technical skill. Let me work with you." For 2 years Sandra mentored me on everything I did not know, which was most of the business side of the industry. How to write proposals, how to price my work, how to talk to clients who had money and expectations, how to build a portfolio that communicated before I ever walked into a room. In 2015, with a small business loan I applied for 3 times before getting approved and $35,000 I had saved over 4 years of working constantly, I started Anchor Home Design. The first office was a desk in a shared workspace near downtown Columbus. The second year I moved into a real suite and hired my first employee. 2019, 11 employees, $1.4 million in annual revenue. 2021, a regional lifestyle magazine ran a profile on me. Rising from the ashes, the headline said, which I thought was a bit much, but the article was honest. The journalist spent 2 full days with me and wrote about the pregnancy at 18, being removed from my family, losing Jonah, building a business from nothing. I told her everything that was mine to tell. I deliberately did not name my parents or their city or their firm. Not to protect them. To protect Nora from strangers trying to fill in the blanks and asking her questions she had not chosen to answer. 19 employees. Revenue approaching $4.8 million. A corner office in a building I had helped design. Nora was 18, in her first year at Ohio State, studying developmental psychology. She was the kind of person who filled every room she walked into not with noise but with presence. She had her father's warmth and something fiercer that she had built entirely on her own. 19 years of silence from the Donovan family. Until 3 weeks ago, Tuesday, November 12, 2024. I was driving home from a final walkthrough on a lakefront property I had been working on for 8 months, a contract worth just under $1 million. My mind was still running through finishing details when I turned onto my street and saw the car. A black luxury sedan with Ohio plates I did not recognize, parked in front of my house. 2 people standing at my front door. One with silver hair and a posture I recognized before I could see his face. One in a camel coat holding her handbag the way she always held it, slightly away from her body, as though she was at an event. Gerald and Patricia Donovan, my parents, 19 years older, standing on my porch as if they had simply been away for a long weekend. I sat in my car for 3 full minutes. I thought about driving past. I thought about calling Nora at her dormitory. I thought about a lot of things. And then I reminded myself that I was 37 years old. I had built something real. I would not hide from them in my own driveway. I got out of the car and walked toward them. My father spoke first. He looked at me, scanned the house, the landscaping, my coat, and said, "Claire, you look well." I looked at both of them and said, "What are you doing here?" My mother stepped forward. She said, "We know about your son, Claire. We know you have a son. We would like to meet him." I stared at her. My father added, "We would like to begin rebuilding the family." The word family coming out of his mouth in that context was one of the more surreal things I have ever heard. I let them into my house. I still am not entirely certain why. Perhaps I needed to understand the architecture of whatever this was before I decided how to respond to it. My father sat in my living room the way he used to sit in restaurant booths, appraising everything. My mother perched on the edge of my sofa with her back straight and her hands folded. I sat across from them and waited. They told me about their 45th wedding anniversary celebration. A formal dinner at the Worthington Estate venue, 180 guests, city council members, law firm partners, hospital board directors, the diocesan bishop. A significant gathering for significant people. And somewhere in the preparation for this event they had apparently been telling everyone about their grandson. Their brilliant, entrepreneurial grandson who had continued the family legacy. They had been telling this story for months. I kept my expression completely still. I asked where this grandson story had come from. My mother said they had read the magazine profile from 2021 and had simply made certain assumptions about my child. She said the article mentioned a child and a successful business and they had inferred the rest. My father said, we would like him to attend the anniversary dinner. A family moment, a reconciliation, and then he opened his briefcase and placed a check on my coffee table. $200,000. He said, bring your son to the dinner, remain for the evening, take some photographs with the family, and then return to your life. He said my name would also be reinstated in the family trust, which he described as currently valued at just over $3 million. I looked at that check for a long time. I thought about the card table Jonah and I ate dinner on for 2 years. I thought about the night I drove home from the hospital alone after they told me he was gone. I thought about Nora asking me at age 6 why she did not have grandparents like other kids. I thought about every single thing I had done without any help from the people sitting across from me. And then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. What happens if I say no? My father said that in that case they might find it necessary to reach out to my son directly, to explain the family history from their perspective, to help him understand who his family was. It was framed as a concern. It was a threat. I was about to respond when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Mom, everything okay? I heard you talking. Nora came around the corner in a university sweatshirt and jeans, her hair up, a textbook in her hand, home for the week for an early Thanksgiving break. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the strangers in our living room. My mother stood up. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion first, then something calculating, then something I had never seen on her face before and did not have an immediate name for. She said, who is this? I said, this is Nora. My daughter. Your granddaughter. The room became very still. My father said, daughter. But the article, the profile. I said, the article said child. You assumed the rest. Nora looked at my parents the way she looked at case studies in her psychology courses, with precise and unsentimental attention. Then she looked at me and said, these are the grandparents who threw you out when you were pregnant with me. My mother said, it was more complicated than. Nora said, which part was complicated? The part where you put an 18-year-old out in the sleet or the part where you spent 19 years telling your friends she was in Europe? My father tried to recover. He said, a granddaughter, that actually works just as well, we can adjust. Nora said, adjust what? She said, I am not a prop you can reposition. I am a person, one you have never once tried to know. My father checked his watch. He said the anniversary dinner was November 20th, less than 10 days away, and that he needed an answer by the 17th. I stood and said, I think you should leave. My mother paused at the door and said, this is an opportunity, Claire. Do not let old wounds cost you your future. I watched them walk to their car. My father helped my mother into the passenger seat with the same practiced gesture I had seen 1,000 times. When they turned the corner, Nora looked at me and said, you are not actually considering this. I looked at my daughter, this fierce young woman I had raised entirely on my own. I said, no, but I am not done with them yet. That night after Nora went to sleep I opened the fireproof box I had not unlocked in several years. Inside was the certified letter from 2005. 3 pages of legal language in my father's attorney's letterhead. The notarized signature of Gerald Thomas Donovan and Patricia Ann Donovan. A witness named Robert Feld. Any dependent thereof, right there in paragraph 2. I photographed every page with my phone and uploaded them to 3 separate cloud accounts. I made a printed copy. I placed the originals back in the box. Then I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, thinking. Nora appeared in my doorway. She sat beside me and looked at the documents spread across the comforter. She picked up the first page and read it slowly. When she finished she said, they really wrote this. They signed their names to this. Yes. She set the page down carefully. She said, I have an idea. She reached for a notebook from my nightstand and started writing. I watched my 18-year-old daughter outline a plan with the calm, organized focus of someone twice her age. When she finished, she looked up and said, "You have always protected me from them. I think it is time we stand in the same direction together." The next morning I made a call I had been putting off. Beverly Hutchins, my former neighbor on the street where I grew up. She was 67, had been a retired high school principal, and was the only person in that neighborhood who had ever treated me like a complete person. She answered on the fourth ring. She said, "Claire, sweetheart, I have been wondering about you for years." I explained what had happened, what my parents had done, what they were now requesting. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said those exact words, "Those exact two people have not changed 1 degree in 19 years. I asked if she still had the security camera footage from her front porch from 2005. She had installed one of the early residential cameras that year, a novelty at the time. She said, "I document everything. Old habit from 32 years of school administration. Let me look." 20 minutes later my email buzzed. A grainy but clear image. A girl in a winter coat standing on a driveway in the sleet. A duffel bag at her feet. The timestamp in the corner read February 19, 2005, 9:24 p.m. The house address partially visible in the upper left corner of the frame. "That was me," Beverly said when I called her back. "That is the night they put you out. Would you be willing to verify this officially if it came to that?" She said, "Honey, I have been waiting 19 years for someone to ask me that question. Whatever you need, name the day." I thanked her and sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. I had the disinheritance letter. I had photographic evidence with a timestamp. I had a witness with 32 years of professional credibility. Now I needed to understand the full picture of what I was walking into. I spent 2 evenings reading everything I could find about my parents' public life over the past decade. My father had become a named senior partner in a firm that had expanded significantly. My mother had won a philanthropy award from the diocese 3 years ago. They were embedded in every layer of Columbus high society. And the anniversary dinner on November 20th was being held at a historic estate venue that the local news had already mentioned in a society column. It was going to be photographed. It was going to be talked about. And according to a source I will get to in a moment, it was also going to be live streamed for the church community and the firm's international partners who could not attend. On Thursday, November 14th, my phone showed a number I did not recognize. I almost declined. I answered. It was Derek, my brother. His voice was 44 years old now, heavier than I remembered it. He said, "Claire, I know I have no right. I know you do not owe me anything." He said, "I need to tell you some things before whatever is about to happen, happens." He told me the grandson story had originated entirely from our mother. She had read the magazine profile in 2021, misread the pronoun used at one point in the piece, and constructed an entire narrative around a fictional grandson who was supposedly running his own successful business, following in the family tradition. She had told this story to their church community, to the Rotary Club, to my father's firm partners, to their neighbors. She had given this imaginary grandson qualities, achievements, a personality. My father had known the story was built on an assumption but had gone along with it because the responses from their social circle had been so enthusiastically positive. Derek said, "I stood at the upstairs window while you stood in the sleet with your bag. I have thought about that night more times than I can count." He said, "I have rehearsed calling you for years. I had your business number for 4 years and dialed it at least a dozen times and hung up every time because actually talking to you would have meant admitting what I allowed to happen." He said, "I am ready to admit it now. If you go to that dinner, Claire, I will be there. I will stand with you. Vivian too. Neither of us can undo what we failed to do. But we can stand in the right place this time." I told him not to warn our parents I was coming. He said, "Understood." Friday, November 15th, my father called. He said, "Claire, the dinner is 5 days away. Final offer is on the table." I said, "I know about the grandson story, Dad. I know you have been telling 180 people about a fictional grandson for a year." He said, "We embellished slightly based on reasonable assumptions." I said, "You invented a person and made him the centerpiece of your anniversary narrative." He said, "I do not appreciate your tone given what we are offering you." I said, "You are not offering me anything. You are trying to buy your way out of a lie you built on top of the lie you built on top of me." He said, "If you do not attend that dinner it will be your loss." He hung up. I sat in my office for a few minutes after. Heart pounding. Completely clear. That evening I sat with Nora and Sandra Okafor at my kitchen table. Sandra had been my mentor for 11 years and was by now one of the closest people in my life. I told them everything. Sandra said, they want you to perform. They want you to show up and be the missing piece that completes their picture. Nora said, they want to use you the way they have always tried to use you. As something they can point to, not someone they actually see. I looked at both of them and said, I am going to that dinner. Sandra said, of course you are. Not for them. Nora said, for us. I said, for the truth. I am done being invisible in their story. It is time to be present in mine. Nora said, I am going with you. I said, this could be uncomfortable. She said, I grew up knowing my grandparents tried to erase me before I was born. I have been uncomfortable my entire life. I am going. I called Derek back. His offer to stand with me, still open. He said, Vivian and I are ready. Do not tell them. He said, there is one more thing you should know. The dinner is being live streamed. Pastor Reed from St. Michael's arranged it. The church congregation worldwide and the firm's international offices will be watching online. 180 guests in person. Unknown thousands watching online. The Truth, live. Saturday, November 20th, 2024. 7:12 p.m. The Worthington Estate Grand Hall was exactly the kind of room my parents had spent their lives working toward. Coffered ceilings, chandeliers, round tables with centerpieces that probably cost more than my first month of rent in Dayton. 180 people in formal attire holding champagne and talking about the things that people in rooms like this talk about. A camera crew set up near the podium at the front of the room. The live stream indicator already blinking red on the monitor off to the side. I stood at the entrance with Nora beside me. She wore a deep green dress and carried herself with the kind of composure that only comes from having decided in advance who you are. I wore charcoal, structured, quiet. I had spent no time on drama and all of it on clarity. You okay? Nora said quietly. I said, terrified. That is not what I asked, she said. I looked at her. I said, yes, I am okay. We walked in. The room began to notice us before my parents did. Heads turning near the entrance. Whispers beginning, the way whispers always begin, at the edges and moving inward. Someone near the coat check said, is that her? Someone across the room said, that is the daughter. I thought she was overseas. I heard someone say, she has a daughter. I thought there was supposed to be a grandson. My parents were on the raised platform at the far end of the room. My father at the podium, my mother beside him, both of them luminous with the confidence of people who believed the evening was already won. My father had just begun speaking. He said, 45 years of marriage has taught me that reputation and family are the same words said two different ways. Patricia and I have built our lives on that foundation. Our children, our community, our faith, our standing in this city. My mother saw me first. Her champagne smile stopped moving. I watched her hand close around my father's arm. He followed her gaze. He stopped mid-sentence. The room turned to follow where they were looking. Someone said, that is the daughter from the magazine profile. Someone else said, I thought she lived in London. The murmurs built into something louder. I started walking toward the platform. The crowd did not part dramatically. People simply shifted, sensing something real was about to happen in a room designed for performance. Nora walked beside me. Derek appeared at the edge of the crowd. Vivian next to him. They did not try to stop me. They moved to a position where they were visible and they stayed. My father said into the microphone, Claire. What a wonderful surprise. We were not expecting. I stepped up onto the platform. I took the microphone from his hand the way you take something that was always yours to begin with. I looked out at 180 faces. I looked at the live stream camera. I said, hello, my name is Claire Donovan. For those of you who have been wondering where I was not in Europe. The silence in that room was complete. I said, on February 19, 2005, my parents discovered I was pregnant at 18 years old. That same evening they asked me to leave this family. 3 days later my father had his attorney mail me a certified letter, notarized and witnessed, stating that I had forfeited all family rights and that they had no legal or moral obligation to me or any child I might have. I said, I have that letter with me tonight. I reached into my bag and held up the documents, 3 pages of legal language, clearly visible to the room. I said, the phrase they used for my child was dependent thereof. My daughter Lily. I gestured to where she stood at the edge of the platform. Your granddaughter. The grandson you have been telling your friends about does not exist. You constructed him from a magazine article you did not read carefully. The article said child. You invented the rest. A woman near the front table put her hand to her mouth. The live stream comment feed visible on the monitor began moving faster than anyone could read individual messages. My father reached for the microphone. I held it away, not aggressively, simply out of reach. I said, "You came to my home 2 weeks ago and placed a check for $200,000 on my coffee table. You asked me to bring this fictional grandson to this dinner, stay for 3 hours, take photographs, and help your story look true. You told me if I refused you would contact my child directly and tell her your version of what happened." I looked out at the room. I said, "I did not come here for money. I came here because I have spent 19 years being invisible in the story this family tells about itself. I am not invisible." A man at the third table, someone I recognized from my father's firm, stood up very slowly and then sat back down as though he was not sure which choice to make. Pastor Reed, the diocesan representative, stepped forward from the side of the room. He said, "Gerald," he said it the way clergy say names when they require complete attention. He said, "Is what your daughter is telling us true?" My father looked at the room. He looked at the mayor of the suburb where they lived, who was seated at the head table and was now holding his champagne glass very still and not drinking from it. He looked at the board members from the hospital where my mother chaired the gala. He looked at the camera. He calculated. He tried to find words that would redirect the moment into something he could manage. He could not find them. He said, "It was an extraordinarily difficult time." He said, "Decisions were made that perhaps deserve." He stopped. He said, "It was complicated." I said, "I was 18 and pregnant and I needed my parents." That is not complicated. He put the people he had removed out into February sleet because their reputation mattered more. That is also not complicated. It is just true. Derek walked onto the platform. Vivian followed. Derek said, "She is telling the truth." Vivian and I were there that night. We watched from upstairs while our parents sent our teenage sister out into the cold. We did not come downstairs. That was our failure. It has been our failure for 19 years and we are standing here now because it is past time to say so. The room erupted in the way rooms do when the thing everyone sensed but could not name has finally been named. Conversations breaking out in every direction. Phones appearing. The live stream comment feed scrolling faster than the eye could follow. I could see individual comments. "This cannot be real. That poor woman. I sat next to these people at church for 20 years. Someone call a journalist." Beverly Hutchins stood up from a table near the back. She had flown in from Columbus that morning. She said, "I was their neighbor. I saw that girl standing in the rain with her bag. I watched from my window long enough to understand what was happening. I have a time-stamped photograph from that night. The address is visible in the frame. I had the original on my phone and I held it up toward the livestream camera. I said, I am not going to pursue legal action. The disinheritance documents they signed are valid and they can keep them. I am not interested in their estate. I built my own." I said, "But understand clearly. If you ever contact my daughter without her explicit consent, if you ever spread a revised version of this story to your community, if you ever try to construct another narrative that erases us, I will make everything I have documented available to anyone who wants to read it. I have the original letter. I have Beverly's photograph. I have the testimony of everyone in this room. And I now have whatever your live stream has captured tonight." I handed the microphone back to my father. He took it with both hands like a man who could not feel his fingers. I stepped down from the platform. Nora took my hand. We walked through the center of the room and out through the main doors into the November evening. The air was cold and clean and completely still. Nora said, "You okay, Mom?" I said, "Yes, I genuinely am." She leaned against me for a moment and said, "Dad would have liked watching that." I laughed. "He really would have," I said. The fallout moved quickly. By midnight the livestream clip had been shared over 600 times in the church network alone. By the following morning someone had uploaded a clip to social media with the caption, "Woman tells truth at parents' anniversary party after 19 years." By the afternoon that clip had 55,000 views and climbing. Someone in the comments identified my design firm. My business inquiry inbox received 14 new messages in 48 hours from people who had seen the video and wanted to work with someone who had built something real. Derek called Sunday morning with a full account. He said, "The mayor left before the dessert course." He said the bishop spoke privately with our father for 40 minutes after the room cleared. He said the hospital board chair, a woman who had worked with our mother on the gala for 8 years, told our mother she needed time before she could speak with her. He said our father had not left the house since Saturday night. By Tuesday, my father had stepped back from his role as a senior advisor to the firm with no public explanation. By Thursday, a quiet note appeared in the church bulletin indicating that the Donovan family was taking a period of personal reflection and would not be leading the annual Christmas fundraiser as previously planned. The following week I agreed to a follow-up conversation with the journalist who had written my original magazine profile. She said she had been watching the story develop online and asked if I would speak with her. I said yes, not to relitigate the evening, but because the response I was receiving from strangers was something I had not anticipated and felt like it deserved acknowledgement. Hundreds of messages in my company inbox, not about interior design. About being cut off from family. About rebuilding. About spending years feeling like you had to justify your existence and then one day deciding you did not. My daughter gave me hope. Thank you for being visible. I went through something like this with my own parents. I did not know other people understood this feeling. Message after message after message from people who recognized something in the story that was theirs. 3 weeks after the dinner, Nathan called. I mean Derek. He drove up to Columbus and sat in my living room with Vivian for 5 hours. We talked about the 19 years the way you talk about a geological event, something that reshaped the landscape before anyone fully understood what was happening. Vivian cried when she met Nora for the first time, really met her, this niece she had never known. Their children, ages 10 and 13, played in my backyard while the adults tried to understand what being a family meant now. Derek said, I am sorry. I know that is inadequate. He said, sorry does not cover what I failed to do. I said, no it does not. But it is a beginning, and beginnings are what I know how to work with. 10 days after the dinner, my mother called from an unknown number. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. She said, I am not calling to ask for anything. She said, I watched the video. She said she had watched it many times. She said, I keep looking at your face and trying to find my daughter in it. I said nothing. She said, your father is not doing well. The firm, the church, his colleagues, the way people look at him now. He does not know how to live inside the consequences. I said, I did not do this to cause consequences. I did it because I could not spend another year being erased. She said, I know that. I understand that now. She said, I wanted to hear your voice because I realized I might never hear it again and I could not decide if I was at peace with that. I said, I am not ready to forgive you. I may not get there. But I am not hanging up either. She said, that is more than I deserve. I said, yes it is. We stayed on the line without speaking for a while. Then she said goodbye and I let her. Thanksgiving 2024 my dining table, the one I refinished myself from an estate sale piece 4 years ago, had 14 people around it. Nora on my right, Sandra Okafor on my left. Beverly Hutchins who had driven up from Columbus the day before and who was currently showing Derek's 10-year-old how to make a paper crane out of a dinner napkin. Derek was slicing the turkey. Vivian was arranging the side dishes with the focused energy of someone who shows love through logistics. Their children were arguing in the hallway about who got to light the candles. My parents were not there. We had not reached that place. I was not certain we ever would. But looking around that table I understood something I had been approaching for years without being able to name it. I had spent a long time mourning a family that had never chosen me. And now I was surrounded by people who had. Nora stood up after the food was passed. She said she wanted to say something. She unfolded a piece of notebook paper and read. She said, when I was small I used to ask why I did not have grandparents like other kids. Mom always told me the truth. She said they had made a choice and that choice was not about me. It took me a long time to really understand what that meant. She looked at me, but I understand now, and I know that everything I have, every single thing I am, exists because my mother refused to let someone else's choice become her identity. She raised her glass. She said, to the families we build. Not the ones that are supposed to want us. Everyone drank. Later after the kitchen was cleaned and the guests were scattered through the house with coffee and leftover pie I stood at the back window looking at the yard. Nora came and stood beside me. She said, you okay? I said, I have been asking myself that question my whole life. She said, what is the answer tonight? I looked out at the yard, at the lights strung along the fence, at the house I had bought with money I had earned in every possible difficult way. I said, tonight the answer is genuinely yes. If you have stayed with this story this long let me say something directly to you. 19 years ago, I was an 18-year-old standing in the sleet with a duffel bag watching my parents drive away. I thought the worst thing that had ever happened to me was happening. I was wrong. The worst thing that had happened to me was the years before that. Learning to take up less space, learning to need less, learning to apologize for existing in a family that treated my presence as an inconvenience. Standing in that sleet was not the worst thing. It was the beginning of the only life I was ever going to fully own. I did not go to that anniversary dinner for revenge. Revenge is what you want when you still need the other person to understand what they did. I had stopped needing my parents to understand anything about me years ago. I went to that dinner because I was done being a rumor in their story. Because my daughter deserved to be seen in the room where people had been told she was a grandson who did not exist. Because the truth does not require permission to be spoken, and it does not require the other person to accept it to be real. If you are in a situation where someone who was supposed to love you has made you feel like your worth depends on their approval, I want you to hear this. You do not need their validation. You never did. The life you build on your own terms, with the people who actually choose to know you, the work you do that no one gave you, the mornings you get up anyway, that is not a consolation prize. That is the whole thing. That is the entire thing. My parents have not apologized. Not genuinely, not fully. My father has not called. My mother calls occasionally, briefly, carefully, and I answer when I can manage it. Derek and Vivian and I are learning what being siblings means without the architecture of our parents defining the space between us. Nora has decided she is open to meeting her grandmother one day, on her own terms, when she is ready. That is her choice to make, and I will honor it completely. I am not waiting for my parents to change before I allow myself to be okay. I stopped waiting for that somewhere around the time I learned to refinish furniture by watching tutorial videos at midnight, because I could not afford to hire anyone, and also because I liked knowing how to do it myself. That is the whole story, really. Not the dinner, not the letter, not the check or the live stream or the whispers at 180 tables. The whole story is just a woman who learned to do things herself, including healing, including deciding who gets to be in the room. That is not a perfect ending. It is a real one. And real ones do not need applause. They just need to be true. Thank you for being here. If this story meant something to you, if it made you feel a little less alone in whatever you are carrying, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Whispers of Wisdom for more stories like this one. Because every person deserves to have their truth spoken out loud.